All right. Well, hello. Really nice to be with you, Benjamin. My name is Rob Zelinka. I am the CIO for Jack Henry.
Awesome. Rob, I really appreciate you jumping on with me this morning and having this conversation. Now, Jack Henry offers a bunch of different services, from technology services, cloud services, security services. Talk to me a little bit more about where you started in with that, or where you fit in with Jack Henry, and also a little bit more about the solution set Jack Henry has.
Yeah, sure. So I've been with Jack Henry for coming up on 7 years now. I have the honor of saying I was the first ever CIO for Jack Henry. In the past, we had a CTO and we had a CISO, but we did not have a CIO. And the gentleman that recruited me here at the time was the Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer, Mark Forbes. Felt that I brought knowledge on the infrastructure and data center side that complemented his knowledge on the software development side and product side. And so we hit it off briefly through the interview process. And he brought me on board. And then ultimately, I had the honor of taking over for him when he retired. And I'll tell you, those were huge shoes to fill. And the one thing that I remembered from a mentor from years back was, don't try to be the person that has left. Be who you are and differentiate yourself differently. And so, I knew that my strengths were in data centers and traditional infrastructure. I had some knowledge and experience on cloud as well, migrating from a traditional hosted environment, even a hybrid hosted environment, to a pure cloud environment. And I spent the first year or so, not even a year, trying to build my leadership team, trying to address gaps, try to prioritize the things that we were going to focus on. And then suddenly COVID hit. And oh my goodness, I was one of those people that was so blatantly wrong about COVID. We as a company made a decision to take 2 weeks where we would go to an all remote posture, except for those roles that just simply could not. And I was one of those people that said, after 2 weeks, life's going to go back to normal and everything's going to just resume like it was before.
Right.
And 2 weeks turned into 2 months, and 2 months turned into 2 years. And so a lot has changed since the time I joined Jack Henry to the time to today. So for instance, we have really elevated the Chief Information Security Officer role to be a peer of the CIOs. Okay. And the CTO, which was absolutely the right thing to do.
For sure.
The world continues to evolve and shift, and having that CISO leadership and experience is absolutely a must.
Yeah.
So now we have what I refer to as really the three musketeers. Some people may call us something else, but all that aside, we meet consistently to represent what's called the corporate or enterprise function. And we have spirited debates and disagreements around everything from what is the best solution for communication and collaboration, and right down to how do we manage AI. On top of that, we have a chief compliance officer now, which we did not before. And all this is really to illustrate for our client base, those that partner with us, that we are maturing as an organization. We have the necessary thought leadership and expertise at all aspects at our executive leadership team. And then we're building out the teams under each of those executives to try to drive outcomes for the company. So fast forward, we are in the midst of what we're referring to in the marketplace as tech modernization. And so what that means, many different things, but at a high level, what it means is that we are in the midst of retiring older products that were built for a different moment in time, perhaps years, if not decades ago. Those environments have served us and our clients well, but they're not built for the speeds and feeds in the modern day era that we're in. And so we are building native cloud environments on native cloud stacks. So one of the partnerships that we're excited about is the partnership with Google, specifically Google Cloud Platform, GCP. Sure. We're doing some fantastic things there. We are building new applications in the Google Cloud Stack with many of their really exciting technologies. So when you think of database technology, most people think of Oracle and they think of SQL. We're thinking of a spanner, and we're thinking all of the ways that technology can help us to scale That's the one thing that I've seen in the 7 years here at Jack Henry. The amount of data that's ingressing and egressing out of the Jack Henry cores is growing exponentially, and
Yeah.
it's not going to reduce anytime soon.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll get into the data conversation because I mean, data really is the lifeblood of AI, but I want to save that for a little bit later and how that ties in. You brought up something really, I mean, several, not just something, several things really, really fascinating and interesting. But the one thing that really stood out was when you were talking about being yourself and fulfilling a role. And I think whether you're coming in as a C-suite, which I think for many people and anyone can be intimidating because you're fulfilling another high executive's role. And most of the time, and often someone who also performed that role very well and brought something unique to it. But I love that. I love the thought of bringing in your own unique characteristics and your own unique qualities because it's authentic and it's pure. And if you're trying to be someone else, and if you're trying to perform like someone else, you lose that authenticity and that purity that even brought you to that position. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I think that's something everyone, and it doesn't even matter if you're looking at the C-suite role or an entry-level salesperson. Be yourself, be authentic, and be true to who you are. So thanks for bringing that up. Now, I love the amount of technology that you guys are working. I also like your continuous strategic approach to growing with the changes that are happening in the technological ecosystem and environment nowadays. Have you seen, and you mentioned cloud, which I thought was the cloud transformation was huge. Even at the time, no one knew what the cloud was and everyone was transforming, wanted to be on the cloud. I see some similarities and differences with AI. Have you seen anything that's really came and been the tidal wave of marketing and just explosion of information that's either good or bad, or we don't know, like AI so far?
Well, the short answer is no, but let me expand on that. So, the lack of hair and the hair I have that is left is a grayer hue, gives me experience, if nothing else. And I feel as though we've reached these inflection points throughout those 30 plus years. So my first inflection point was when the PCs hit our desktops.
Yeah.
And so think of how exciting it was to retire the typewriter, retire the fax machine. By the way, it was at the same time where you were told you can't have the ashtray on your desk anymore. And you ended up with this computer running WordPerfect, running Lotus 1-2-3. And then the first version of the internet shortly followed. So I'm going to date myself here, but the search engines back then were either Alta Vista or Yahoo.
Right.
And there was even this thing called Ask Jeeves, which
Ask Jeeves.
remembers Ask Jeeves. It's kind of the modern day equivalent is probably what Apple calls, and I won't say it because it'll trigger a device, but the personal assistant, or what Amazon has, and I won't say that one either because another device will be. But nonetheless, that was a really exciting time. It was also a scary time for those that were not familiar with technology in terms of a computer. But people acclimated, and that's where I really started to learn about technology. I was fascinated by the way that technology could enable and augment the human experience.
Mhm.
And that was circa 1992, 93, 94.
Yep.
And then shortly thereafter, I remember being handed this device called a BlackBerry. And oh my God, how riveting that was to be able to have access to email when I wasn't at my desk.
Mhm.
What a blessing that was. And I later found out, oh my gosh, what a curse that was too,
Right.
because you never shut it off. But you would be sitting in a restaurant in your car. I umpired baseball games, and I'd have my BlackBerry in my pocket. And in between innings, I'd check email
Yep.
on a little device. So that was definitely an inflection point. And then not too far after that, Apple came out, and I remember vividly, they came out with this smartphone called the iPhone.
Yep.
And the only company that would partner with them was AT&T, and they took on an enormous amount of risk. And I remember this gentleman, I was living in Chicago at the time, and we worked together for about 10 years up to that point. And he came in all excited. His cheeks were all rosy because he just stood in line for 2.5 hours in the cold winter in Chicago, Michigan Avenue. And he was waiting for the first ever iPhone. And he got one. And so he put it on my desk and said, Rob, this is the future. And I took it, I looked at it, I threw it in the trash, and I handed him my BlackBerry Curve. And I said, nope, this is the future. And do you know, every year, at least twice a year, when they release a new iPhone, he sends me a message to say, hey, Rob, how you doing? Just checking in, sent from my iPhone 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15, 25.
Right.
And it's really cool because I was wrong there, but that was also an inflection point because we've moved into this smartphone realm where you were able to combine your productivity suite for work with things that were fun
Yep.
that you could pass time with. And now think about it. If I took your cell phone away from you, could you board an aircraft? Could you get an Uber? How would you go about conducting your typical way of life?
Yeah.
It'd be very challenging.
Very difficult.
So now fast forward to your question about AI. I have not in 30 plus years seen a technology that is evolving and changing so rapidly than this. And the same excitement, but same anxiety is there. And maybe even more so because what's happening now is there's all sorts of creative use cases to help the human experience with AI. But there's also bad people out there, threat actors that are going to leverage this technology to do bad things. And I was watching a 60-minute story this past weekend about this teenage girl who was part of a deep fake, and her head was superimposed on another person's body. And as you might imagine, it didn't leave for a flattering experience for her.
Yeah.
What anxiety that's caused her, her parents. And now that trust level you have is shattered. And how do you replace that and rebuild it?
Sure.
So yeah, no, to be candid with you, I have not seen anything that moved as quickly and could be so impactful one way or the other as AI today.
Yeah, great points. I appreciated a lot of that stroll down memory lane as well with a lot of the other stuff and the BlackBerry. So this also, we often talk about the duality of man, right? And then you have this duality of technology, and you talked about this. And I think it's really interesting when you talk about the cell phone, like you said, the great thing is that I'm connected. I can always get information, and I can always talk to someone. The bad news is I'm always connected. People can always get a hold of me, and someone can talk to me, or I'm always connected, right? Now you go social media and you go through different technologies. Again, social media, it's wonderful because I can see pictures of my nieces and nephews in Australia. I can connect a family that's far away. It has a lot of use cases. But then the duality of that is the harm it does cause teenagers, the way it does inflict biases, subconscious biases in our mind, is we're not even realizing what we're picking up and what even as adults we're learning. So this duality of AI is such an interesting conversation too, because again, I think this technology has the most potential to help humanity, as well as the most potential to harm humanity as well. So it's going to be interesting. Now, from your position as obviously the conversations we have are with other CMOs, CTOs, CEOs, how do you feel like that is being embraced right now? I can see a big difference from January, where I'm having the conversations where it's flat out resistance, to now where it's, okay, I have to get to know about this and I have to understand it. How about for you? How have you approached it? What has been your personal approach and your conversation with other executives and peers?
Here's how I'm approaching it. I think resistance is futile. And I've learned this over time. IT organizations in the past were what I call departments of no. And so you were told this was the laptop you would get, this was the cell phone you would get, this is the applications you would get, you would like it, or you wouldn't use it. And
Sure.
invariably what would happen is people would do one of two things. They would leave your company and go work somewhere else where they felt there was less restriction on them being productive or creative, or they would try to find ways to circumvent all the rules you have in place to prevent certain things, and they would do it for sport, and they would be successful. And then they would bring it to your attention that they were able to work around all of the blocking mechanisms you had in place. So the first thing that I do is I'm always receptive to embrace new technologies.
Yep.
And I think that's really important because as a human race, we are reluctant to embrace change. It's just human nature. We tend to gravitate towards what makes us comfortable. and we tend to deviate away from things that make us anxious.
Yep.
So the first thing I do is, as I'm embracing all the good, the bad, the ugly that a technology, in this case, large language models, AI, generative AI, has to offer. The next thing I do is I want to learn as much as I can. And so the one lesson I give everybody is never stop learning, no matter how young you are or how old you are. Because, and I learned this of all things from Ferris Bueller. So Ferris Bueller, in his wisdom as a teenager in Chicago in 1982 or 3, gave everybody the advice to stop and take a look around because the world moves pretty fast. And sometimes you might miss things if you don't stop and look around.
Yeah.
So all the more reason to stop and take a look around. For me, education is part of the process.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time on airplanes in my downtime, taking LinkedIn Learning, Udemy Learning, all sorts of white papers to educate myself, listen to points and counterpoints on different approaches to utilizing technology in a consistent, in a safe way, but also ways to really drive and enable a user experience, company goals and objectives. And then the third thing actually that I look at is, now that I'm educating myself, and I'm always going to be continuing this process of learning and growing and developing, how can I govern it? And so for me, the next logical place is to put some rails around it. Because at the end of the day, while you want people to share your enthusiasm for a specific technology, there has to be some guidelines and rails. Otherwise, people will potentially get off the rails and do harm to themselves or their company.
Sure.
Unwillingly.
Yep.
And so that's where I think the formation of a center of excellence, of a governance committee. And so for me, again, I look at my peers, chief technology officer, our chief risk officer, our chief information security officer, our chief compliance officer, and we meet consistently where we're discussing various topics of interest, one of which large language models and AI. How do we govern it? How do we get it in people's hands quickly, consistently? How do we monitor and track it? Not to monitor and track necessarily who's using it and why, but how is it helping us to augment the user experience? Because I think that's one thing that's causing a lot of stress for folks right now, is that the storyline keeps evolving to where, hey, this technology will eliminate jobs, will eliminate people. One of the things that I really enjoy about Jack Henry is the value system that Jack Henry has employed since its inception over 45 years ago is consistent with my personal value system, which is I place high value on human beings and the human experience. And what this technology is for me is a way to enable that experience to be improved, to be more consistent, not to replace the human. And I think that there are companies that are still trying to sort out, how does that technology work for them? And will it reduce the dependency on a human? And I'm not saying that that's the wrong approach, but for us, we always want the human being in the mix because we believe that differentiates us in the marketplace.
Yeah, I love that. And I've heard the term reimagining instead of, reimagining our approach. And I agree. I think one of the exciting things with AI is not the elimination of a human, but the ability to be able to really focus our human on efforts that need human thinking and need human consciousness and need human interaction. And if you even think about programmers and data analysts and all the monotony of the little things that they have to do every day that just are monotonous and just take up time, where we can repurpose that into something that's more fulfilling, something that's more, I guess you could say, useful for the company, something that drives a bigger ROI, a bigger kind of investment into those people. But again, taking away the people is a dangerous approach for AI, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me give you a great illustration of this technology and how it works. So we are in the midst of the end of May, early June, when people are graduating from grammar school, high school, college. My family celebrated one of those monumental moments in someone's life. So my son graduated from high school, and I had to provide a speech at the graduation party.
Yeah.
Well, I just put it off because I had other commitments and I was traveling, and guess what? My travel got delayed and I kept putting off the speech. So here I was at the 11th hour without a speech, and I was a little bit sleep deprived. And so I went out to ChatGPT and I went out to Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, and I asked help. Write me a graduation speech for my son who's graduating high school. And I got a speech. Now, I will tell you, I was conflicted because I want to be viewed as an authentic person. And I don't want to plagiarize someone else's speech.
Sure.
So I didn't know whether I should just do it myself, or would I be able to maybe get a head start by using a large language model. I was amazed at the large language model capability. And of course, I took what they gave me. I asked it, shorten it, because the first speech was ridiculously long. And then they shortened it, make it for a high school student. And make it funny. Okay. And all of a sudden I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is pretty good. Now what I can do is I can personalize it.
Yep.
So now the people that are listening to it, and the people that have listened to me for weeks, months, years, will know that's Rob speaking.
Yep.
And it saved me an enormous amount of time. Now, could I have been that creative on my own? Sure. But it basically got me out of a situation where I was feeling rushed. I was feeling the pressure. Now, if I just let an automated video speak, that it would have been very inauthentic. It would have, now I could have done that, and to show the people in the audience the power of that technology. But the reality is there's different people in the audience. There's high school children. There were grammar school children. There were people that were retired in their 70s and 80s, and some that were even close to 90, who, if I start talking about large language models and AI, I've lost them. They don't have any concept of what that is, right? Yeah. But yeah, so this technology has a tremendous ability to meaningfully affect our lives in a positive way. But as we talked about, in the same way, it probably wouldn't have taken too long, because this technology is getting really, really good. You have created a deep fake with a video of me saying things that people would be shocked would be coming from me, and no one would think that's not Rob. It doesn't sound like him. And then all of a sudden, my company is wondering, who is this guy? I mean, think about it this way. Oftentimes you'll see on someone's X account or Facebook account or LinkedIn account, views are my own. And what that kind of does is it puts a line of demarcation between you as the human, who may have a political belief, a religious belief, or even an opinion on Ford versus Chevy, right? And if the company's opinion is Chevy and yours is Ford, there's naturally some friction.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, where this governance comes into play that I had alluded to earlier, is if you leverage the large language model technology, you still have accountability, meaning you can't just say, oh yeah, sorry, we didn't mean to say that. The large language model said it. That's where you still need to have the human being in the mix, reading through it, reviewing it. That's the governance model.
Absolutely love that. So I have an AI video. I have an avatar that I messed around with, and I speak 7 different languages in it, and it sounds, I mean, just like me. And it's actually really amazing. It's a fun video. You can check it out on YouTube and everything. But yeah, it's interesting though, as we start looking at governance and responsibility. And earlier you mentioned you being the CIO. And obviously, like you said, sometimes CIO and CTO is synonymous, especially with smaller organizations, because they can't afford a CIO, CTO, and everything else. But there is a difference, especially in organizations that have the luxury of both a CIO and CTO. But one of the things I feel, not resistance, but especially at the beginning in January-ish, February-ish, was it's almost like, great, this is another problem that's falling into my lap. Another thing that I have to be secure with, that I have to make sure that my employees aren't abusing, that I have to make sure that we're using ethically and correctly. So two questions with this. One is, whose lap do you think it's really falling on? Like, meaning CIO, CTO, it might be a combination of all. And do you think there is going to be a need for a CAI, right? So for a chief AI officer, eventually for companies that can afford it. Where do you see this going with the C-suite?
That's a wonderful question. So if you think back a few years ago, there was a proliferation of various C-level titles. And a lot of people that were the CIO had a difficult time embracing the fact that there was an encroachment of their duties and responsibilities. I personally do not. I think we're better with strength in numbers. Yeah. And so the fact that we have more C-level executives that are more focused on specific parts of the spectrum, I think really is the right mix for Jack Henry. And I would encourage any company to find a way to fund those key positions. That said, to your question on who owns it ultimately, I can't tell you it's a single person at Jack Henry. Now, the CTO and I think if you were to ask him from a perspective of what is the one thing that maybe frustrates him about me, he may tell you that he doesn't feel I'm willing to move as fast as he wants to move, but I assure you, I want to move as fast.
Right.
But being candid, I'm still struggling to learn, how do we move fast enough to where it's not disruptive to our people? You know, when you look at our employee base, we call them associates here. We have associates that have been here for many, many years, some of them their entire career here, 10, 20 years, 30 years. And so if we were to move away from, say, Microsoft Office and move to Google Workspace, that's a pretty big paradigm shift. Maybe not so much for someone we hire out of college, because those people that we hire out of college, they've been operating on a Chromebook probably for 10 years already.
Right.
From an ownership perspective, we all meet consistently and we all have an equal voice. And like I said earlier, we're not always in agreement. But the good news is once we have that debate, and sometimes it's a spirited debate, we always align and we always execute, and we support the associate experience, the client experience of Jack Henry. So right now, as it stands, I would tell you the chief technology officer is laser focused on how do we embed AI into our product work stream. And that doesn't just mean external facing products, but it also could be internal products. At the same way, I'm trying to run the business of Jack Henry with my team. And so when I look at, do we make a decision to be on Zoom or do we move to Teams? I'm looking at how does AI fit into that blend, and how do I leverage what my peer, the CTO, is trying to drive from a product perspective. If I don't have to reinvent the wheel, all the better. And then that gives us what we call internal mobility, where developers, engineers can move from one business group to another, one product group to another, and drive value in meaningful ways. At the same time, my peer, the chief information security officer, he wants to move as fast too, but he's thinking about it from a security perspective.
Right.
Can we do it safely? Can we do it consistently? Are we taking on an unacceptable amount of risk? And then, of course, the chief compliance officer, he's thinking about things from a regulatory perspective. Are we doing things that are going to put us on a radar of a regulatory body? And then, of course, the chief risk officer has all of that umbrella to figure out. So we are best when we're collaborating to solve these and tackle these problems than if we're doing them in silos. Now, I'll close with the last thing. Do I see a chief AI officer role? I don't want to say no, but right now the answer is, until we get to a point where we need that specific silo of knowledge, we feel pretty good about the way we've structured our leadership, the center of excellence, the way we're going about things right now. We have our HR peer, Holly, who's just spectacular, who's making sure that we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's from an associate employee perspective. But one of the things we talked about, because we also have a data governance council, is this a natural part of that person's role, set of responsibilities? And I would say to you, possibly, but right now, we believe it or not, we're still in our infancy trying to put the governance model in place to safely, securely, consistently use large language model technologies.
Yeah.
And we're continuing to monitor and look at how we're going to evolve that. So at this point, I don't see a chief AI officer in the future, but I might have a different answer for you this time next year.
Sure. So yeah, so speaking of different answers, it also brings up another thing as far as moving too fast with AI right now. And you talk about different answer in 1 year. And we talked about earlier about how much is going to change with AI. We talked about the BlackBerry and how much has changed with cell phones since the inception of the BlackBerry. And as a IT executive and leader myself, I have made too quick of a decision. I won't say often, but it has happened in my career where I've moved too quickly and I've implemented something. It may have took me 6 months. It may have taken me a year to get this fully implemented. And then there's something better out there. This isn't doing what it is. And that's just always a risk we take. But I think with AI, we're going to see a couple things. One is a bunch of turnover in AI companies. So a bunch of AI solutions and products, not quite like the .com falling out, but maybe close to, but in a different way. But we're going to see a lot of fallout with AI companies that are coming out with whiz-bang solutions that aren't really fit for long-term market. And I think the hesitancy that I would have as a CEO or any executive with the company is I want to make sure that I'm working with a company that's able to grow with the market and be able to be consistent. Because I don't want to have to spend an implementation, support, getting to know the company, a relationship in 1 year with that to only have to change and turn that relationship 1 year. 1 year later, I'm really looking for long-term relationships in this industry. And I know that's going to be tricky. What's your thoughts with that?
I share the same thoughts you do. So when I look at the current landscape, there's the usual suspects. So you have Google, Microsoft, Facebook to some extent. You can never count out Apple or on Salesforce is probably on the periphery. ServiceNow certainly, and then of course the one I didn't mention is OpenAI. I do think that this is going to be very similar in nature to other technologies that came onto the marketplace, onto the stage quickly, that some of the smaller players will be absorbed by some of the larger players. And what will happen is one of two things. The larger players will acquire the smaller players because there's a gap in their portfolio, and the path of least resistance to get where they want to go fastest is to acquire. But it's not also beyond the realm that really good technology gets acquired to be destroyed. In other words, to be shut down so that someone else doesn't have an advantage. I think back years ago, I worked for a company that tied your biometric fingerprint to a digital wallet. And one of the major credit card companies acquired that company to destroy it, to basically kill it, because that particular credit card company had a higher fee per transaction than its competitors. And that technology allowed you to stack rank the payment vehicles of your choosing. And so a grocery store, a department store could stack the payment rails to their advantage, and thus pushing a lesser preferred payment rail rather, to the bottom of the list. And if it was a two-line display on a Verifone device, you never saw it.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely going to get interesting. Now, I want to get a little bit philosophical, and it's one of the things that I actually think is fun about the AI conversation is we can talk about the psychology of it, philosophy of it. But I have this thought, and you don't have to agree with this thought because I've had many people who don't. So there's this concern of AI and artificial intelligence becoming human-like and taking over humanity. And I have this thought that there's also an equal problem, and it's equal but opposite, and that's humans needing to become more AI and machine-like to keep up with AI, and then losing their humanity and you can somewhat see that when you talk about being attached to a cell phone, when you talk about everything else in ways that you could say we're losing our humanity in essence, but I'm not saying that's for sure. That's not like foreshadowing. I'm just saying it's a possibility. So when you look at things like Elon Musk Neuralink and embedding a chip in your head for super intelligence and things like that, I would do it. I have to admit, and I've always said it, like, look, if someone said you can put a chip in your head and you can speak every single language out there, I would have a hard time to be like, I'm not going to do it. is that, do you see that really being relevant? Is that, I don't think it's too sci-fi. Like, what do you think
Well,
about that thought of humans needing to become or becoming more machine-like?
yeah, I don't think it's terribly far-fetched. So just take a step backwards. You, as a parent of a high school kid, you really need to be up on the lingo that they use. And if you ever watch text messages from school-age children, there's all these acronyms and abbreviations. And if you're not up on the lingo, you have no idea what's being said.
Right.
And you really want to keep your eye on what's happening with your kids in today's modern realm, especially with the advent of this technology and social media.
Yeah.
So I do see that we have embraced abbreviations, things in our daily speech patterns. But I do think in this instance, people will ultimately have to think a little differently and react a little differently. You call it almost machine-like. I think where the rubber meets the road is the empathy still needs to be there. The interaction with a human, with another human or a group of humans needs to be there. And if that can be augmented, so think of it this way. Do you remember the first version of Google Glasses that came out, the Google Glass?
Yep.
And they were really awkward looking. And what was more awkward was the human being that was standing in public venues with his finger or her finger doing this. And
Right.
you were looking at the person oddly, right? And I remember it vividly. I was in a gym and this individual was doing squats on a Smith machine and they were wearing the glasses. And I thought it was odd, and then I immediately became troubled when he walked into the locker room with the glasses on. And I thought, oh my gosh, what, and your mind immediately goes to a place, and you're trying to take your mind out away from that place. I do think though, if you think about it this way, if you're walking down a street in a city you've never been to, and you just are looking for a coffee shop or a bank, and if you're wearing wearables, glasses, that will tell you there's a Starbucks 400 feet on your right, there's a bank across the street on your, that's impactful versus you looking at your cell phone and walking into a light pole, or worse yet, sadly, there's people that are hitting people who aren't paying attention, and you end up being knocked out and having your phone stolen from you, sadly. So I do think that this technology is going to blend into the human experience. But I think from my vantage point, where I'm guarded and railed is I want it to augment the human, not replace the human.
Absolutely.
Because the human still drives the outcome.
Absolutely. It's going to be, I mean, there's so many things you could, directions you could go off with this. And I think eventually it's going to be interesting as the question, AI, let's say self-driving cars, right? There's going to be deaths caused by self-driving cars, but I wonder how humanity will embrace if it gets to the point where self-driving cars are statistically proven to be safer than humans driving. But yet there's still accidents that happen, because there will be, and there's still deaths that happen, but those deaths are going to be reduced. But because it's caused by a machine and it takes the human out of control, will humanity ever give up control for the betterment of a self-driving car that's more safe and removing, let's say, drunk drivers and all the other stuff off the road and things that are killing us? Or because there's an accident, everyone's going to jump on board and be, nope, someone died, we're not going to do it anymore? What does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I'll give you the self-driving example is perfect. And I'll tell you why. So we have a Tesla and we did not pay for the self-driving feature, but they enabled it for free for a month.
Yeah.
Great marketing, right? And so we tested it out. It was exciting and terrifying all in one, because there were certain things it could not navigate. For example, a school bus that stopped, it did not see that the arm came out to stop. Now imagine how horrific that would have been if we weren't paying attention and we just let the car drive.
Yep.
But that's easily fixable through software.
Sure.
Because there's all these cameras that can see, okay, I'm going to zone in on this big yellow bus that has a stop sign that protrudes from it. That means we stop.
Yeah.
where the human, there's no programming the human who's not paying attention or sneezes or something happens. So again, I think the best use of this technology is where you're blending technology with the human.
Like
And
it.
I've felt this way for 30 years.
Yeah.
Uh, and I still feel it this way. Now, you could ask me 30 years from now, if I'm still around, I might have a slightly different response for you. But I do think that people will become smarter in some regards,
Yeah.
more adept to the way automation, how it's helping us, how it's evolving us. At the same time, the technology is going to learn to be more human too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rob, I could seriously talk to you for another 2 hours, but I know you've got work to do. But I really appreciate you jumping on with me. I'm going to give you last thoughts. Any last thoughts you want to make before we separate here?
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation with you as well. My thoughts are this: do not be afraid of this technology or any technology.
Yeah.
Embrace it, but think about it wisely. Put together a committee of people, a center of excellence. Never lose sight of the human impact, how it can help, how it can hurt. Create a governance model and continue to learn and continue to apply your lessons learned to make yourself and your company and your client experience better.
I love it, Rob. Thanks again for joining me. I appreciate all your insights. You've been a wealth of knowledge and information, and thank you again.
Thank you.